Well, let me just say, if you get an email that talks about enhancing your pleasure, I would probably encourage you just to delete it, but not today. Today we talk about the thrill returns, 7 steps to welcome joy back into your life. Welcome aboard.
Guys ready?
When it comes to porn, are you stuck, spinning out, or slipping backwards in your life? If so, then welcome to the Finding Traction podcast, a show dedicated to those who are looking to gain recovery momentum away from porn and toward the life and relationships they have always hoped for. Now, here's your host, Vern Tomke.
Well, before we get back to this topic about the return of joy, I want to give a shout out to all of my Australian friends that are listening to this podcast. And I am going to create, coming up here, what I'm calling an Australian rules group. Now, there is such a thing as Australian rules rugby. I have no idea what that is. I had an Australian guy try to explain it to me, and I didn't get it. But here's the issue with my Australian friends. It's very hard for them to find groups to join. And so what we're going to do is we are going to create a group that meets Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. in Australia. And that usually means, although it might jump around a little bit, that it means in our time, it's like 2 in the afternoon. So our group is going to be, for example, it would be 2 in the afternoon on Monday here in North America, but in Australia, it would be 7 a.m. Now, it might jump around a little bit, but the goal is that we're going to collect enough Australian guys that they set the rules. So if you're interested in joining, let me know, bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. And even if you're from North America, we'd love you to join that group. It just means that it would be kind of an early afternoon group on the West Coast. That's 2 o'clock. But for you on the East Coast, that would be 5 p.m. or 4 p.m. Central on Monday. So that group is joining, so is going to be started. And I am really wanting to make sure that we can find a time that works for our Australian guys. So please take note of that. All right, well, let's talk about this whole idea of the thrill and joy and pleasure. Last podcast, and I do realize it's been a few weeks since I gave you the follow-up to last podcast. Since then, there's been a few things happened, including me getting my 4 wisdom teeth out and a few other real joyful experiences. Actually, that's gone really well, so I'm very blessed and thankful how well that operation went. But, the last podcast, it could be summarized by the old B.B. King song, "The Thrill Is Gone." Well, today we want to reverse that song. We want to talk about the thrill returning. And if you were with us or you want to go back and review that, basically I said last time how, and I explained this word anhedonia. And anhedonia is about the loss of pleasure or joy in our lives. And in particular, we introduced the topic, and then we talked about how porn contributes to the loss of joy in every area of our life. And in that podcast, we explained a little bit about how the overloading of our pleasure circuits lead to that condition. And what happens when we have and view things like porn, we raise the barrier to the pleasure centers in our brain so that now all the simple things in life, the regular things, no longer bring us joy or pleasure or passion. And basically we said porn is perfectly tailored to overload our pleasure circuits. Porn results in the removing of the experience of joy and pleasure in most anything else other than porn. And as a result, last time we talked about how we really end up having to ramp up or escalate our attempts to regain or re-experience the pleasure that is now harder and harder to find. So, is there hope? I mean, I did promise you that we would talk about the option or the possibility of the return of joy or pleasure to your life. Having said that, let me give you a bit of a warning. It's not as simple as simply you stopping looking at porn. Even if you stop and look at porn, it's not going to automatically reset your brain and return you to that desired place. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great step, and it does perhaps accomplish the purpose of clearing out some of the brain fog. But just no longer looking at porn isn't automatically going to bring back the joy in your life. If you've ever heard the term a dry drunk, well, that's simply a person who no longer drinks alcohol, but they're mostly just as miserable as they were before. I mean, we don't want to be a dry drunk when it comes to porn. So where do we start? Where do we jump in? So again, let me just say I'm especially indebted here to the second half of the book, Thrilled to Death by Archibald Hart. Now, he's passed away, so he's no longer with us, but it is a great book. If you want to learn more, I'd encourage you to get the book, Thrilled to Death by Archibald Hart. So I'm going to give you 7 steps to re-engage with joy. And here's the first one. Number 1, repair what is overloading your system. It's interesting how when I talk to people and work with people, I am often surprised at the high overload of stress that many guys live under. Stressed out, overloaded lives. And whenever I start to address it, it's interesting how many guys are resistant to lowering the stress in their lives. Hart says this: if you are stressed out, don't be surprised if you are experiencing a high degree of anhedonia. Well, why is that? Well, here's what he explains. He says adrenaline is a stimulant, and adrenaline is a natural response to living stressed out lives. Excessive use of our adrenal system because of stress can shut down pathways to the pleasure system. So in other words, when we're living overloaded, stressed out lives, we are over-relying on adrenaline. Now, I use the word over-relying on it because obviously there's times and places and professions where adrenaline is going to flow. We all need a certain degree of adrenaline. Think if, for example, if you are an athlete or you are an emergency room doctor or you're a police officer, whatever. There are places where adrenaline flows and it's helpful for us. But when I use the word over-relying, I'm thinking about almost the classic example of the student who leaves his term paper to the last minute because he works well under pressure. That's an example where you are deliberately misusing your adrenal system, your emergency system. And the more that you misuse that emergency system, which is there in case of emergency or high stress environments, then what happens is you're overloading your lives and you're increasing the barriers to experiencing pleasure and joy in your life. This is what he says: stress can directly overstimulate the pleasure system, thus shutting it down. Adrenaline, which is our emergency hormone, has one very important function to perform. It does help us survive an emergency. Now, here's something that's also worth saying, especially in the area of our sexual behaviors. It's good for us to look, for example, if we have paired our sexual attractions or our arousal template with adrenaline. When those two are paired, what it will do is it will lead to some form of sexual distortions in our acting out patterns. So, when we think of sex and we pair it with adrenaline, what happens is we now use adrenaline to replace a normal sexual hormone arousal. In other words, we now come to look for exciting extras for sexual stimulation. So, for example, if you engage in risky or out of the ordinary sexual behaviors, the release of adrenaline adds excitement, right? But what happens is when they become closely paired, it becomes a major cause of sexual distortion. So this is what Archibald Hart says. He says, to heal your sexual distortions, this pairing of adrenaline with sexual arousal has to be broken. The connection between sexual arousal and adrenaline has to be broken. He goes on, you need to learn that healthy sexual arousal doesn't need any extra excitement to be enjoyable. In fact, over the long haul, he says, it actually reduces your pleasure. So the more you rely on external mechanisms of arousal, the more you become dependent on them, and the further you move away from intimacy with your loved one. So the first thing is really to look at the whole area of adrenaline. And that's an important one in the society we live in. So that would be the first area that has to be addressed. So here's the second one. Replace your life with positive addictions. Now, we all know what a negative addiction, right? We spend time thinking about it. Either we are anticipating the next time we can get back to our addiction, and when we are engaged in that addiction, we get a pleasurable feedback loop. So what happens when we try to break a negative addiction and we simply leave our lives, like a vacuum, that's not a good thing. The best thing to do is to find ways to replace bad addictions. And in one sense, we can almost use this term, replace them with good addictions. There's a guy called Dr. William Glasser, and this is what he says. He sees addicting activities that are strengths, not weaknesses or handicaps. And he talks about positive addictions, repeating habits, and even if they become a bit compulsive, they can actually help to offset the destructive ones. So he heartily endorses things, positive addictions such as jogging, biking, swimming, journaling, those kind of things. And what happens is when over time we continually get into that place, we start looking forward to that. We start expecting that. And in one sense, we start getting some of the simple pleasures from repeating positive addictive behaviors. Here's an example. I've had problems with my hip, and I went to physio, and it might be bursitis. We're not sure, but I've had problems, and then of course I've just had my wisdom teeth out, so I haven't walked now for going on a month. Like, not real walk, not my power walking in the morning. But I tell you, I had a positive addiction to walking. I'd get up in the morning, and the first thing I would think about is, I got to get up for my walk. If something happened in my day that I wasn't able to go for my walk, I felt like something was amiss. There was some pleasure in my day that I was missing. And you know what? That was a good addiction. It was good to be dependent. My brain looked forward to it. And in one sense, it needed it. And so it's using a positive addiction to offset a negative addiction. So, that's pretty simple. Replace negative addictions with positive addictions. And over time, as those become set patterns, your brains will start looking forward to it. They will start giving you those little hits of pleasure when you now are participating in a positive, addicting behavior. Number 2. Here's number 3. Return to your senses. Now, we have 5 senses, I'm told. Sight, hearing, taste, smell. Sight, hearing, touch. Touch. 5. Let's do that again. Sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste. I think I got them all. But do we actually use those senses as much as we could. I mean, think about hearing. I've built this great room on the back of my house, and I now can open up my patio doors, and I've started listening to the sounds of birds. But I could go all day and never even notice the sound of birds. You know, listen to the sound of your friend's laughter. Those are just hearing. You know, take something like smell. You know, what do you, when you're out, I live in a place that's got a lot of farm smells. But it's funny, over time, people talk about how smelly the city is, but I hardly even notice anymore, you know, the smell of manure, the smell of these things, because I'm just used to growing up here. Big one, taste. Think about the taste senses that we have. Now, this one is really important to me because now I'm not a big foodie, okay? You know, foodies, they're people that talk about food. They watch food or cooking shows, you know, and they always, you know, after they're done cooking and doing this, then you have the big taste test at the end. But I've realized just how limited I've been in my ability to savor food. So much so my wife went and bought a sign. She has it over our table, and it's the sign that says savor. S-A-V-O-R. Savor. Because I can go through a meal, and food is just functional for me, and I can hardly even taste it. Well, it's not that I'm not tasting it at one level, it's just that I'm not aware that I've actually eaten the food. Which is not a great way if you're, you know, I have a wife who love language is words of affirmation, and if you don't even notice the food that she prepared for you. Recently, my wife made me a burger. Now, a burger's got to be my all-time favorite food. I'd take a good burger over a good steak any day. And she made me this homemade burger. It was perfect. It had pickles, it had tomatoes, it had just the right kind of cheese, it was cooked just right. And you know, it was about 2 hours later, and I realized I don't think I tasted the burger at all. I mean, sure, it was now in my gut, but it never apparently even passed my taste buds. Got me thinking about that great line in, or that great scene in What About Bob, where Bob's sitting at the family table, the Marvin's family table, and he's going on and moaning with pleasure about how good the food is, much to Dr. Leo Marvin's chagrin. Remember that, the great scene? So return to your senses and actually begin to enjoy the simple pleasures that come from your five senses. Okay, now here's the fourth key. Reorient your pleasure system. Now, if you've done any work with personalities, you know that there's often just two types of people described. There's type A personalities and type B personalities. Type A personalities, they crave over-the-top experiences. They can require heightened arousal. They love adrenaline-fueled activities, excitement, action, louder music, extreme sports, those kind of things. That's a type A person. They also make things happen. Type B people are really different. They're more easygoing. They don't get as angry. They're not as explosive. They're not as time conscious. And they are often just a different wiring. And it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy some type A activities. You know, going on a roller coaster, going on a zip line, those kind of things, right? Those are type A activities. But Archibald Hart talks about us learning to reorient many of our activities from type A activities, which require excitement and thrills, to more type B activities. He says, what will happen if you do that? You will actually start to recapture pleasure in your life. It's a difference between playing a video game, which is high intensity video game, and reading a book. For example, I play video games. And one of the things I've noticed is I never will fall asleep playing a video game. But reading a book, which is also pleasurable, yes, I do fall asleep. One is more thrill-based, excitement-based, brain activity-based, and the other one is not. Another way he looks at it, he talks about the difference between pleasure boosters and pleasure busters. And pleasure busters are things that fuel the need for thrill-based pleasures in our life. He says there's one thing to have those at different times in different places, but if that's the only way you can experience pleasure, it's a roller coaster that you need in order to get on time and time again. And the roller coaster has to be bigger and crazier than the last time. So he says, here's some examples of ways to boost the ability to experience pleasure. Now, these aren't very exciting or very sexy, but let me just give you a couple examples. Number one, getting enough sleep. He says if you get enough sleep, your brain, including your pleasure center, will work better as well. A pleasure booster, practicing self-care, taking a break, having some silence and solitude, taking some me time. I actually think the younger generation is much better at this to understand the need for self-care than an older generation. And they're just more aware of, I'm starting to burn out. And I think sometimes, younger people overuse the term burnout, but that's my own personal thought. But when they use that term, what they're sensing, I need to recharge. I need to perhaps disengage and find some ways to work on my mental, physical, or psychological health. I need some peace and quiet. Those are all pleasure boosting activities. So I think in terms of that we do need to look at reorienting our life away from merely relying on type A pleasures and moving more to type B pleasures. Another way that we can increase pleasure in our life is to reorient our activities around our values and purposes. Where do we find our deepest pleasures in life? When we're fully engaged in the things that we are unique at, fully engaged in things that our passions and purposes align around. Now, you might be in a job where you don't see any passion or purpose in it, and then that is challenging. But more and more, I would hope that we would be looking for the activities and aligning the activities of our lives with what gives us the deepest purpose in life. One of the things that I tried to do as I was in the same job for many years is I tried to give away things that I either wasn't especially good at or didn't give me a real sense of purpose or fulfillment. They didn't line up with my gifts and my passions. So we do, hopefully as we get old, we can come to a place where we're going, am I doing just the things I have to do, or am I able to retailer my job or my life around the things that I truly feel are important for me? And if you're stuck doing things that you don't feel are important to you, chances are you're not going to experience joy and pleasure in your life. It's just that simple. So some of you may need to relook at that and reorient your life towards that if you're going to experience more joy and pleasure. Okay, here's getting even more practical. Let's recycle, or you could say regurgitate, your pleasurable past. Now, this is where Hart is really interesting what he talks about. He talks about when you can go back and re-experience past pleasures, he says you can open up an enormous source of healing for a damaged pleasure system. He says it can be incredibly therapeutic to go back and recover some of the pleasures you had and pleasure connections you had and you made a long time ago. For example, times when you were younger. Go to a place that you can open up happy, earlier memories. Now, maybe that's hard for some of you. You've had a very traumatic background. That's very possible. But I think most of us can find something that we can go back to in our lives that we can recycle. This is what he says. Even though you may be anhedonic now, you can still recapture a lot of childhood and childlike joy by revisiting your childhood happiness memories. I heard a story of was a study that was done by people. Now this was a story about two missionaries or missionary groups who were in other countries, and they're in really difficult circumstances. And they compared those who had happy childhood memories with those who could not readily access them. And they found it very interesting. They found that those who could go back and in one sense re-engage or recycle past happy memories, it's like they had a much greater reservoir or resilience to deal with their present difficulties. Now, I think this is also helpful when you're trying to work with somebody, and we've done this in our groups or individuals, where we're talking about what gives you joy and pleasure in life. What are you looking forward to? And sometimes when people say, well, I'm not really sure, or I don't really have anything that comes to mind, or I feel like I've lost pleasure in a lot of life. And one of the questions I'll often ask is, well, what did you used to enjoy doing when you were a child or where you were younger? Where were you happiest? What specific activities were you doing? What sports or hobbies or friends or extracurricular activities when you were younger? I did this for my own life. When I went through a significant midlife crisis when I turned 40, it's like I lost joy in most everything. And I had to go back and ask myself, well, what did I used to enjoy doing when I was a kid? Now, I tried some things. One thing I tried was I loved fishing when I was a kid. I'd go down to, this fishing place, and I shared about this last time. And so I tried, well, maybe I can get back into fishing. So I went and got a fishing rod and went to a creek, and, there was a lot of bugs and it was a lot of work, and it took a long time to get there, and it didn't really work for me, but I tried it. But here was something I always loved and was passionate about, and that was music. I love music, all kinds of music. From Alice Cooper to the Carpenters. That's, everything in between. And except disco. Never liked disco. But, one of the things that I started to do was, how do I recapture my love of music? So for 3 years, I actually started the folk music club. For 3 years, we brought in folk music artists from all over the country and had some great concerts. Now, near the end of that we stopped doing that about 3 years ago now, just because we hit COVID, and then it felt like it went from a joy to a lot of work. But recently, one of my guys that I really enjoyed, his name is Josh Hislop. He's a Canadian singer-songwriter. I just had the idea, I really enjoyed hearing Josh, and he's not doing a lot of concerts. So that's it. I'm just going to invite some friends. We're going to sponsor him. And we're going to come out and do a concert here in our hometown. So I got a hold of him. He says, sure, for this amount, I'll come on out. So I'm in the process of organizing a one-off concert. He'll come out and play, and anybody else, I'll put a few posters up. Anybody else that wants to come out and hear his music can do that. But it's a way of me returning to some of that earlier joy. I used to enjoy stamp collecting. That's a really exciting thing. I used to enjoy stamp collecting, and I still have some old stamp albums. So I went out and I dug up my old stamp albums, especially Canada and US stamps. So I don't know, maybe I might get into that a little bit. Now that's really, that's not very exciting, I recognize, but there's a memory there. I remember collecting stamps and putting them into my album when I was a kid. I'm recycling my pleasurable past. Okay, and here's the last one. Number 7, recapture the joy of little things. I like this one. Here's a great quote he makes. Overwhelmingly, people report their most enduring and meaningful pleasures come from relatively minor, ordinary things in their lives. This is what he says. When you become content with ordinary feelings and experiences, you will find that they are more beautiful and more satisfying than thrill-loaded experiences. That reminds us a little bit of that type A and type B pleasures. So here's a question. When is the last time you sat and just watched the sun come up or go down? I was talking to my family. We used to go out, grew up in a little town called Creston in southeastern British Columbia. And, they had a lot of really cool lightning storms there. Like, they were not over top of us, so it wasn't dangerous. And we would go out and we would put our lawn chairs out at night in a summer night and just watch the lightning. Or here's a great one. I grew up on a cow farm, walking around with bare feet and stepping onto a fresh cow pie in bare feet and letting, the poo ooze up between your toes. That was a pleasure. I was a strange kid. Again, overwhelmingly, people report the most enduring and meaningful pleasures come from relatively minor, ordinary things in their life. Here's an interesting, I think it's a mostly safe activity. If you went to an internet search engine and you type in what things really give you pleasure, you get some really interesting results. Here's one thing I went to. 12 pleasures that give you much more happiness than sex. Dislodging the stubborn food from your teeth. Letting out a fart at the end of a meeting. Now, again, these were very simple things, but here's the whole point. It's the little things in life. Without the little pleasures, your life wouldn't be worth living. But chances are you've stopped noticing the little things. Recapture the joy of the little things. All right, so let's go back. 7 ways to bring joy back in your life. Repair what is overloading your system. Number 2, replace your life with positive addictions. Number 3, return to your senses. Number 4, reorient your pleasure system. Number 5, reorient your life around your values and purpose. 6, recycle your pleasurable past. And finally, number 7, recapture the joy of little things. So here's to a new joy in your life. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at bandofbrothers.care@gmail.com. I love to hear from guys. I love to connect with guys individually in groups. Maybe you just want to connect with me for a one-off session on Zoom, and we can talk a little bit more about how I could help you in your recovery. So until next time, here's to joy. Here's to return of the thrill. God bless.